Hello, my name is Harrison Rudnick, obviously. And today I'm going to be talking about musical adaptations. And this includes movies turned into musicals, musicals turned into musical movies, movie musicals that were turned into stage musicals. Basically, any kind of adaptation that has a musical somewhere in the evolution process. And by the way, I don't have a script for this. I'm just going to be ranting for however long. I have my computer here for reference if I need to look anything up, which I probably will. But I'm just sitting down in my basement. My phone is propped up against a box of Fruit Loops. Like, don't expect quality. Just expect my unhinged mind. Okay, so something that is essential... something that is essential for any adaptation, particularly with a musical adaptation of something, or something that was adapted from a musical, is changing the source material on some level. And something that a lot of people don't really understand about changes to source material is that doesn't necessarily mean changing the script or the story in an impactful way. It just means changing something. That can mean the way that something is presented, the way that it's staged or blocked, just the dynamics between characters, the acting choices. Something has to be changed because, let's say the producers. The producers was originally a movie that was then made into a musical, and then they took the cast of the musical and made that into a movie. The adaptation, the movie musical producers is more or less a filmed version of the stage show, just with a little bit more of an elaborate set, for better or worse. And by which I mean for worse, because it didn't really do so well. Like, it wasn't received particularly well. And that is because they did not make necessary changes to fit it for the medium of screen from the medium of stage. And that is because of the fourth wall. See, the fourth wall is just the barrier between the story and the audience, and it is present in every medium of storytelling. However, it is a lot more literal for stage shows, because a stage literally has four sides, and one of those sides, the fourth wall, shows a very clear boundary between the audience and between what is happening in the story. And the fourth wall, or as Uda Hagen, an acting coach, called it, the fourth side, is very clear, but also very fragile. It's very easy to break the fourth wall, because in a stage setting, because it's a lot less concrete. It's an imaginary barrier. It's not actually there. However, with the screen, you're a lot more immersed in the story, because there is no set viewpoint. That's what cameras are for. They can show you things from all angles, which is why, because of that different kind of perspective, there is a need to change things in adaptation. The producers didn't do that, and instead opted for a multi-camera format very similar to a 90s sitcom, like, say, Friends, where even though it was filmed on a camera, it was still mostly only a set with 3 sides instead of 4, because they had a live studio audience. That's what the producers did, and it didn't turn out so well. So instead, we're going to look at a really good example of changing the source material for an adaptation, and that is Matilda. Matilda was originally a book published by Roald Dahl in 1988. And the book Matilda is about a genius girl she's 6 years old, and she is so intelligent that she has psychokinetic powers, and she uses this to defeat her tyrannical headmistress, Miss Agatha Trunchbull, at the school she goes to, as well as her abusive parents. And Matilda was adapted into a movie by Danny DeVito, but we're not going to look at that. We're going to look at the musical version by Tim Minchin in 2011? And that changed a lot about the original story, just because a musical is a different medium. It added a subplot about the character Miss Honey's parents. It developed on the Russian mafia storyline. It slightly expanded Miss Trunchbull's backstory from the novel, because the original novel by Roald Dahl, has a lot less story than a 2-hour musical, which is understandable. I mean, usually when something is adapted into a musical, they have to pad it because musicals are generally at least 2 hours long. They have to add things. And so Matilda added a lot. They also removed some things, like there was less focus placed on the interactions between Matilda and her parents in the musical than there was in the book. Like, in the book, there was a subplot about how Matilda tricks her parents into thinking the house is haunted. This is not present in the Danny DeVito movie or in the musical. They cut that completely to place more focus on the main conflict between Matilda and Miss Trunchbull. They had to change things in adaptation. However, in 2022, the musical was made into a movie, and they changed very little in terms of the script. Like, it's almost identical. I mean, they changed a few lines just to help with scene transitions, but overall, it's basically the same script. However, they still made changes because they changed lots of staging and blocking, just the way that scenes were presented. And probably the most notable example of this is When I Grow Up, which is one of the most iconic songs from the musical. In the musical, the number very famously features swings just hanging down from the ceiling, giant swings that the child ensemble, like, they get on while they're singing. And it's just such an iconic image from the song and from the show itself. However, the movie does not have that, because the point of the swings is to fly out over the audience and just create the sense of immersion. You don't need to create that sense of immersion with the screen because it already exists. They're already in their own separate environment that is completely detached from the audience. So instead, it was the kids fantasizing about being adults, and it had the kids basically playing adult roles. Like, one of the kids was driving a bus, one of them was riding a motorcycle, another one was in a plane. Lots of vehicle-related things, now that I think about it, actually. Anyways, there was also Smell of Rebellion, which is Miss Trunchbull's song, one of her songs, which, even though none of the lyrics are changed, actually, one verse is removed, but almost none of the lyrics are changed, the instrumentation is changed to be a lot more intimidating, and just the way that the scene is presented, it's a lot more dramatic, it's a lot more cinematic. But overall, the script wasn't changed that whole lot, and that it shows Matilda was adapted from a book into a musical where lots of things were changed. Then it was adapted from a musical into a movie where very little was changed. And then you have, and it was very well received. Like, it has a, let me see. It has a 92 on Rotten Tomatoes. So that's really good for any kind of movie, especially a musical movie, because musicals are often a much harder sell. And then, on the opposite side of that, you have In the Heights, which is a 2021 movie, which was originally a musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda of Hamilton fame. In the Heights, while it kept the same plot and same basic story beats, changed the script entirely. It also changed the order of songs. It changed the events in which story beats happened was changed quite substantially, as were some pretty major story elements. However, it still worked, because they kept the same general storyline, the same characters, and the same music. They just changed the order of it, quite substantially. And this is basically the opposite of what Matilda did. Matilda changed very little, taking it from the stage to the screen. In the Heights changed a lot. However, In the Heights has a 94 on Rotten Tomatoes. It is believed to be one of the best movie musicals of the 21st century, and not without good reason. It is a good movie because it knows what to keep and what to change in adaptation. So those are two really good examples where both of them have changing to the source material. Matilda was mostly changes to the way that things were presented, but it kept the script. And The Heights kept the same general vibe of the show without changing a whole lot in the way it was presented, but it changed the script a lot. And it worked very well for both instances. Then you have stuff like Chicago, which worked in that it didn't change a whole lot. Because Chicago is designed to emulate vaudeville. That's what it's intended for. And because of that, a lot of the musical numbers in the movie adaptation are sort of dream sequences that are on a stage. And the reason why that works is because, unlike with producers where they just sort of filmed it but placed it inside a movie set, the musical numbers in Chicago are on the stage. So it is recreating the same feeling of the stage musical, and it worked because Chicago, the musical, was already very successful. It is, now that Phantom of the Opera is no longer on Broadway, Chicago's longest running show, and the movie adaptation of Chicago won Best Picture. So those are all examples of good adaptations of musicals. Then there's things that are bad adaptations of musicals. I already touched on The Producers, which was not a very good adaptation. And then there is Phantom of the Opera, starring Emmy Rossum and Gerard Butler. And that musical had its fair share of problems. First of all, Emmy Rossum is a good singer, but she also kind of sounds too much like a high schooler. And I get that Christine Daae, her character, is supposed to be young, but in the end, her age worked to the detriment of the character's voice as well as the acting capabilities. Then there's Gerard Butler, who sounds like me a little too much, and I am not nearly good enough to play the fucking Phantom of the Opera, and neither was Gerard Butler. Gerard Butler was the wrong choice. Then there were changes in his deformity, which made him more conventionally attractive. But one of the big changes was that the director, Joel Schumacher, the guy who made Batman and Robin, didn't change enough from the source material to make it interesting. He did try, changing some things, but in the end, it didn't work. See, Phantom is basically, like The Producers, a filmed version of the stage musical with very little change. The only things that Phantom does change, besides adding a couple of scenes, is staging it in a way that doesn't make sense, and changing a lot of the singing to dialogue. So the changes weren't exactly to adjust the musical for the medium of screen. It was more to make it seem like it wasn't a musical. It was from a director who did not know how to handle musicals, and it shows, which is very different than, say, West Side Story, which had Steven Spielberg, who, again, never did a musical before, but it worked because he brought stylism to it in a way that was functional. Schumacher, nowhere near as good of a director as Spielberg. So, yeah, Phantom of the Opera, because of the way that it was adapted, shows a fundamental weakness in the movie. And then there is things that don't change enough, they change less than Phantom of the Opera, even less than Producers to an extent, but this is not when adapting a musical into a movie, but when adapting a movie into a musical. So, let's talk about Mean Girls. Mean Girls is a 2004 movie that is an instant cult classic. It was very successful, and not without reason. It was considered very edgy for the time, very biting. It is one of the most quotable movies of all time. The characters are instantly memorable and funny. The social commentary is relevant and timeless. So it was really only a matter of time before it was adapted into a musical. And the musical forgot one of the most important things when adapting something into a musical. A musical is just so different from a conventional movie. You can't keep it exactly the same. The problem is Mean Girls is such a beloved intellectual property that the writers of the musical felt that they couldn't change anything, so they didn't. They just took the original story and then pigeonholed songs into the gaps. But the thing is, there weren't really any gaps. They had to create them. And that's not to say that Mean Girls the musical doesn't change anything. It gets rid of a lot of the racial stereotypes. It adds the cheating subplot to be a lot more comedic, because instead of the affair happening in a room, it's happening inside a mascot costume, but that's just a one-off joke. There's also a subplot dedicated to the love interest Aaron, but it doesn't affect the story in any way, so yeah. However, by and large, Mean Girls the movie and Mean Girls the musical are pretty much identical. The only difference is one of them has songs. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, yeah, that's the difference between a musical and a movie, but no, because I want to look at one of the other musicals that was originally a teen movie. It is something that is compared to Mean Girls so much, its unofficial title is Mean Girls, but it's 1989. And that's Heathers. Heathers the musical, did not achieve the financial success of Mean Girls, but critically, especially in recent years, it has become acclaimed. And that is because Heathers the movie and Heathers the musical, despite featuring pretty much the same plot, changes a lot of story beats to better fit a musical medium. Entire characters are added and removed, scenes are completely changed, the dynamic between the two main characters is fundamentally altered, because a musical tells a story in a very different way than a traditional movie does. And that is why Heathers has been critically well received, where Mean Girls wasn't. Both of them were originally teen cult classic comedies. But the musical adaptation, Heathers, changed a lot while still keeping the most iconic moments. Mean Girls changed almost nothing. That is why one of them works and the other one doesn't. And then you have the gray area. Hamilton. Now, I get that a lot of people probably think of Hamilton, and they don't think that it's adapted from a pre-existing IP, it's adapted based on the person's story. That's not exactly true. It's based on a non-fiction book. It is, I own the book and I can't even remember what it's called, but it is a biography of Alexander Hamilton. And the reason why I say that Hamilton the musical is based off of that book specifically is because if you read it, it's very, very similar to the musical Hamilton. Lin-Manuel Miranda has said that he was inspired to make a musical while reading that book. One of the lines in the first chapter, which has Eliza reminiscing at her husband's grave, says she had an expression on her face that said she would never be satisfied. Lin-Manuel Miranda literally took lines from the book and put it into the musical. So why am I talking about Hamilton when it wasn't based off of pre-existing IP, it was based off of biography? Well, because the Hamilton biography was one version of Hamilton's story. And the thing is, Lin-Manuel Miranda changed too much. That was his problem. He changed too much about it. Specifically, it was something that didn't need changing. And a lot of this boils down to historical inaccuracies. And the thing is, certain musicals, like Hercules, inaccuracies aren't important because it's stylism. Hamilton preaches itself as being completely historically accurate, but Lin-Manuel Miranda changed a lot of things just to fit into a medium that it wasn't really designed for. One of the most prevalent examples of this is the existence of the Hamilton-Reynolds affair at all. That affair never actually happened. It's been thoroughly debunked many times over, but it was included in the musical because it just sort of worked. And this is where adaptations changing too much can become a problem. Because even though Hamilton is very critically and financially successful, it is considered the biggest instant hit of any musical, probably since Phantom of the Opera. It still has some story issues that are a direct result of adaptation. On the opposite side of that is Tick, Tick, Boom, which was interestingly directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda. Tick, Tick, Boom was originally a one-man show. However, when it was added to a movie, they obviously had to change that, and this gave them a lot of freedom. That's the difference. Tick, Tick, Boom, basically, it was an entirely new movie, even though it was already based on something. I told you that this was Unhinged. I'm going in all sorts of different directions right now. In fact, I was about to say something, and I can't remember what I was going to say, so... Yeah, this is chaos. And then there are some shows where they can't really adapt it into a movie because it's designed for the stage, like, say, Six, which is supposed to be a concert. You can't make that into a movie. You can make that into a film stage show. And similarly, Come From Away. Come From Away is not supposed to be a concert, but the entire cast functions as a Greek chorus. So you can't make that into a movie without being really, really creative with it. And then, last example before I end the video, Dear Evan Hansen. Dear Evan Hansen changed some things. Hey. Okay. Dear Evan Hansen. So, Dear Evan Hansen did change some things when it was adapted into a movie. But this wasn't because it was designed to better fit with the movie. It was more trying to fix problems with the show that didn't really exist in the first place. I don't know. I've never been a huge Dear Evan Hansen fan. So, I will admit that. But the reason why Dear Evan Hansen as a movie failed wasn't just because of the casting issues, like Ben Platt being way too old, or with certain changes to the story that kind of made it fall apart, although it was definitely a part of it. Really, the big issue with Dear Evan Hansen was that it took a story that fundamentally didn't work and tried to make it work. That's the problem with Dear Evan Hansen. It has good songs. That's why it was successful. But the story, just on a fundamental level, doesn't work. It is held together by its music and its music alone. And in that respect, it is very similar to Love Never Dies, the sequel to Phantom of the Opera, where the story just makes no sense. It can't make sense, and you can't sympathize with anyone because they're all horrible people, but the songs are pretty catchy. So, and that's why Love Never Dies will not ever be a movie, because you can't make that into a movie. The stage allows a suspension of disbelief that doesn't exist with movies. And so, Dear Evan Hansen is a type of issue that goes way deeper than just an adaptation. Alright, so I think that is pretty much everything. I started off with an idea of what I was going to say, and then I just went completely off the rails. But that is basically a lesson in how to adapt something into a musical or turn a musical into a movie or somewhere in between. Change only what you need to change to make it fit in the new medium. Don't change things just for the sake of changing things, because that pretty much never works.